So our next reader is Gerald Micheal Guglielmo. He has had an unexpected path to becoming a writer. He spent some time in the Illinois Air National Guard, got a PhD in physics, and then after a brief career in the field of physics, went on to a long career in software. And though he's always had an interest in creative expression, he didn't really start writing short stories until 2017. He writes in various genres, including science fiction, fantasy, and the supernatural, and he's currently working on his third book in a science fiction trilogy about a civilization where everyone has 9 lives. So please welcome him to the stage.
Leaps of faith. Wendy and Tony awkwardly sat on an old moss-covered log facing a small fire pit that hadn't seen a flame for many years. Beyond the pit, hard to see in the darkness, was an ancient oak tree with a trunk wider than the 2 skinny teenagers. Being bookworms, they generally preferred the company of a hefty tome over the teasing and mocking of the other students at their high school. They were both wearing blue jeans and t-shirts, hers yellow and his gray. Cheap sneakers, well worn and long past needing replacement, completed their attire. Wendy possessed a mercurial personality, able to slip between moods like trying on clothes in front of a mirror. Her silvery gray hair and green eyes frightened her classmates in elementary school. By high school, that fear morphed into hatred. While the boys ignored her, the girls viciously teased her. She acted as if she didn't even hear those taunts, although deep down her soul was weeping. She longed for a friend and hoped Tony would be that and more. He wasn't like the other kids in town. Although quiet and often hiding his eyes from the world, he was nice to her. Early on, she thought he was just being polite, but over time she began to suspect otherwise. Maybe he is a kindred spirit, she thought. For weeks, she hoped the answer was yes and feared it was no. Finally, hope prevailed, and she asked him to come with her into the woods. She didn't tell him the place was important to her, in case she was wrong. Tony was a little shorter than her, shorter than most of the boys his age. He kept his light brown hair long so it could hide his blue eyes whenever the dark visions took hold. Those visions, ever swirling like a whirlpool at the edge of his soul, were the result of a past trauma. Since angry or unhappy thoughts often triggered his dark moods, he forced himself to remain upbeat no matter how bad a situation became. He had no friends, and his parents hardly noticed him. Like Wendy, he wanted to find a friend, and if he was lucky, maybe even a girlfriend. He had a crush on her for months, but he lacked the self-confidence to ask her out. Even so, when she first asked him out, he hesitated. Is this a cruel trick? He wondered. However, she wasn't like the other girls, mean-spirited and always vying for approval from each other. She seemed like a truly good person. She was smart, a little impish, and an outsider like him. He wanted to believe she liked him. Thus, after a short, awkward silence, he eagerly said yes. Neither of them wanted the other to come over to their house, each having their own very different reasons, which they didn't want to share, so they agreed to meet at the bench behind the old church at 9 p.m. Tony arrived first and, to his relief, Wendy a few minutes later. After chatting briefly, they walked quietly together down an overgrown path. After 15 minutes, they reached the clearing where they were now seated. Possessing excellent night vision since the age of 8, Tony was able to observe the clearing fairly easily in the darkness of the new moon night. Apart from the abandoned fire pit and the old log beneath him, there wasn't much to see. Unlike her, he could hear the faint sounds of the forest, nocturnal creatures going about their nightly activities, undisturbed by the presence of the 2 visitors. Inhaling, he noticed the faint aroma of damp wood, an earthy scent left behind by a light rain earlier that summer day. As he sat next to her, lost in the moment, an old scar on his left shoulder began to tingle, and he experienced an epiphany. His left knee began to bounce quickly, as it usually did when he was nervous. He needed to tell her he knew, but he wasn't sure how to say it. In many of the novels he read, the protagonist always came up with a witty way to say something difficult. Needing a witty remark himself, he found his mind was a blank slate. Unable to come up with anything clever, he reluctantly decided to just say what he was thinking. "You're a witch," he said quietly as he looked into her eyes. "What?" she exclaimed in surprise before crossing her arms defensively and glaring at him. "If you think I'm evil, why did you agree to come with me?" His accusation was a bad sign, and she was beginning to panic. Witches weren't treated well, and if he started spreading rumors, her life would be at risk. Realizing the mistake he made, he quickly replied, "No, I mean a good witch. I believe witches in general are no different than anyone else. Some are good and some are bad. You're definitely good." If she was less outraged than before, he failed to notice. "Why would you say that about me?" she asked, no less upset. She wondered what clues she missed when judging his character, and her mind raced trying to figure out how to mitigate the potential damage from her errant judgment. The evening, only moments before one of great promise and excitement, had taken a dark turn. "Please let me explain. You misunderstand what I'm saying," he pleaded. She still looked very angry, but he assumed her silence meant she was willing to listen. He took a deep breath and exhaled quickly. It was a technique his father taught him to muster courage. "When I was 8, something attacked me in these woods. A wolf, but also not a wolf. I was alone, dying from blood loss and some poison or curse. An old woman found me writhing in agony and healed me." "A doctor? You were saved by a doctor, and that makes me a witch?" she asked skeptically. She was not in the least bit mollified by his story. If that was the best explanation he has to offer, then I am in serious trouble tonight, she thought. She felt confused and unsure of herself. On some level, she was afraid. However, she also still wanted to hug and kiss him. "Of course not. She wasn't a doctor. She was a good witch." He paused briefly to see if she would object again. When she didn't, he went on. "Although my wounds healed, her magic left a scar behind. A protection ward, I think. That scar burns when magic is near, coldly when it is evil and warmly when it is good." "Is it burning now?" she asked in genuine surprise. She stared intently back at him as if daring him to say yes. Fear and hope were competing within her. "It's burning warmly, and I hope you won't hate me for discovering your secret," he replied apologetically. "I won't tell anyone. I promise." "Show me," she demanded. He didn't want to show her his scar. He never showed it to anyone. Even his parents were unaware of the mark he carried. His reluctance wasn't out of shame or embarrassment. He was already teased and mocked by his peers. Instead, he feared the inevitable violence against him if it became known he was touched by magic. "I want her to trust me," he thought. Slowly, he pulled back the sleeve on his left arm. There, faintly glowing on his shoulder, was a blue pentagram. She was saddened and relieved by what she saw. "That doesn't prove I'm a witch," she whispered. Her mood was quickly shifting. He just shared a dangerous secret with her, one that could destroy him if made public. That took a great deal of courage and trust. Maybe the evening could be salvaged after all, she thought. Her desire to hold him grew stronger, and she found it hard to resist. "I don't care if you are a witch or not. I like you, and I hope you like me too." In that moment, he felt like he was at her mercy. Whether he felt euphoric or devastated hung in the balance. As he held his breath, awaiting her response, it felt both amazing and terrifying to be carried along by a river of desire and anticipation, hoping but not knowing. It was exactly what she wanted to hear. She felt her heart skip a beat as a wave of warmth spread through her body, dispelling any lingering feelings of doubt and anger. Uncrossing her arms, leaning closer, and smiling, she said, "Hey, do you want to go for a ride?" "Sure," he replied, thinking she had a motorcycle hidden somewhere nearby. He was a little scared of being on one, but the thought of wrapping his arms around her waist thrilled him. She reached out to give him a strong hug and placed her left cheek next to his. Whispering into his ear, she said, "I'll get my broom." After letting go of him, she jumped up, ran past the fire pit, and disappeared behind the oak tree. Before Tony could say anything or even grasp what was happening, she reappeared with a broom in her hand and a mischievous grin on her face. Actually, I am a witch.